Hi, my name is Ron Sobel. I'm currently president of North Star Media, a music publishing company in Los Angeles, California. We do music publishing, music administration, and project development for musicians and for artists and for media companies. Prior to founding North Star Media 4 years ago, I was vice president and attorney at ASCAP in Los Angeles, where I was for 16 years.
Ron, were you a musician growing up?
I was a poor musician. I mean, I certainly loved music and understood it, and I studied piano and guitar, but I knew that I wasn't a player, and I hung with players, so I knew that I heard it, but I really wasn't able to produce it, so I got as close as I could to it. I went to law school just to represent my musician friends. I really never intended to practice law, but all of my musician friends would bring me contracts. I just was intrigued with how they were being represented. So law school was a place to go to, at least for my purposes, learn the rules of the game. Publishing company effectively is the manager of the song. So the songwriter creates a song, and forgive me, but when writing a song in my world is a three-dimensional entity. It's not lyrics on a page. It's not a linear proposition. It's a living, breathing entity. And a song is composed of the writer half and the publisher half. And the writer is the creator, and the publisher is the business end of it. And in the business world, or the merging of music and business, for every $1 that this half of the song generates, this publishing half earns $1. So as royalties increase and money gets significant, $100, $100, $500,000, $500,000. And the publisher is the one who really administers the licensing, the collection, the distribution, the marketing, the exploitation. So effectively is the entity that manages the song. If a writer wants to do both halves of that, if a songwriter wishes to manage his own operations, he can be his own publisher. He certainly owns the publishing. But at the time that a writer says, I'm really a writer, I really want someone to help me manage the song, they'll enter into some sort of a publishing arrangement for all of this or a portion of this, but a publisher is that entity that manages the song. Yeah, once you have this, what we call the 100% writer share, forgive me, and the 100% publisher share, this publisher share is 100% negotiable. It's only what the writer and a third-party publisher agree to. A writer might want to incentivize a publisher with a full 100% share. Let's effectively be partners. Sometimes a writer will say, I'm only going to give you 50%, which is called a co-publishing deal, and that's co-publishing. Oftentimes the writer is strong enough that they can do most of the activity for themselves, exploit it, market it. They're the artists themselves. They can do all of that, and all they really need is for someone to collect the money, collect the international royalties, and in that way they would only need an administrator for the song. And then you go into what's called an administration deal, 10% or 15% of royalties only, as opposed to 50% or 100% of this portion. The notion of a writer shouldn't give up their publishing is always early advice early on. Don't give up your publishing, because indeed it is so very valuable. But the answer is, if you're a writer and you can't do what a publisher does, specifically exploitation, marketing, pitch it to a cover artist, pitch it into film and TV usages, pitch it into advertising use. If you can't do that, you would want to engage the services of a publisher. And too often now, I've found as an attorney in my young career, and if you read any of the books that you read, publishing is valuable. Don't give it up casually. Don't sell it, don't negotiate it away. But the answer is, oftentimes that's not great advice, because you wind up in the cliche that you have a whole loaf of not a lot of activity, or you can have a half a loaf of a very lot of activity. So although in my young career as an attorney, and I look back and I really had advised many clients, young writers, don't give up your publishing, when aggressive representatives and aggressive publishers were offering to help. And you look back on a career and you say, boy, we could have used the help of a publisher, and it would have been really good to incentivize somebody on board and to bring somebody in. Well, when we talk to a young writer, and we're to see if we want to really join in some sort of an association, some sort of a partnership, whether it's called a joint venture or a co-publishing deal, and it's just a matter of trying to find the right talent, someone that we believe in, that's either writing something unique or challenging or has lyrically a point of view or musically it's dynamic. We are really looking for creative and unique artists, people that have gifts. And then it's just a matter of what can we bring to them. Are we the right person? If it's someone that's in a genre that we're not really effective in, then we're probably not the right publisher. And publishers come in all sorts of shapes and sizes and temperaments and skill sets. So it's really important for a writer to find the right publisher, equally important for a publisher to find the right writer that we can develop and work with and market. We sign writers to contract. We've signed several. In 4 years, we have sort of a small, and we're a relatively small company. We buy catalogs, but we also sign writers to develop. And we've signed one strictly a producer writer, didn't want to be an artist at all. We've signed a Latin artist who has now a really wonderful emerging career. His name is Paco, and I'm sure you'll hear of him, and he's on MTV right now. You hear him on a lot of commercials. And Paco is a writer that we're developing. We have another writer called Cooper Thompson, which is a traditional singer-songwriter, and we've worked with him. So we take on writers, and now we're looking at one or two other really exciting writers that we want to get involved in. And publishing no longer is a flat process of just taking songs and expecting the record company to do all the heavy lifting. Publishers now really take an active, aggressive role in marketing, shopping, exploiting, career development, and it's an important decision now. It's just not only who's writing the best songs, but who can work with you in a partnership to promote the career of that songwriter. There are several income streams for songwriters specifically, and again, in most circumstances, for every $1 that the writer gets, the publisher will get $1. So the income streams are valid for both entities. Certainly, number one, radio airplay, a traditional form, radio airplay, which will generate money for both entities, obviously. And the more you get played, the more you get paid. So if you go up the charts, and if you go up the pop charts, and if you're on the pop charts for a long time, those are significant amounts of money. To be really specific, a number one pop song, number one on the Billboard charts, of your radio income alone is going to generate upwards of $200,000, sometimes $300,000, perhaps more if it's a long-term pop song, for the writer share. A second $200,000 or $300,000 for the publisher. That's called public performance income. ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC are the three organizations that represent writers and publishers. And if you're a writer or a publisher, certainly you want to be affiliated with either ASCAP, BMI, or CSAC in the United States to collect those. That's called public performance airplay. A second profound pile of money is called mechanical income, and that's when your song is reduced to a mechanical form, the old language for a record. Once your song is put into a record and the record is sold, mechanical royalties have a royalty right now by statute, 8.5 cents per song sold. So if you have a song that's on a million selling record, 1 million times 8.5 cents is $85,000. So even if you're the songwriter who stays at home and just writes, and you're not the artist, you're not the main famous person, you're just the writer that got your song to an artist, hopefully through a publisher, and then that artist, if you sold 1 million copies, the songwriter and publisher at that point would split that $85,000. If you're a writer that has multiple songs on a CD, $85,000 for each of the songs. So for a self-contained writer that wrote 10 songs on 1 million selling record, 85,000 times 10 just for the songwriter royalties. In addition to public performance income for airplay and mechanical income for sales, a third very large stream of income is film and television revenues. And film and television revenues have two components. One is the front-end license, the permission to use your song actually embedded, synchronized into a film and TV, and that synchronization is known as a sync license, and there's a front-end fee, $1,000, $3,000, $10,000 if you're famous and well-known and they want your song, sometimes much more than that. So there's this upfront sync fee for synchronizing it to film and TV, and then once it's played in the television show, ASCAP or BMI or CSAC will pick it up and it'll become a performance income. So performance is on radio, but it also is on television. So those are the three major components. We're now putting a lot of music into advertising and commercial jingles. You'll now recognize pop songs that we all grew up with, and pop songs that are just released currently. And very significant amount of income. The fee, the sync fee for putting it in, can be substantial. And if you're played in the commercial, you'll go on and get performance income from the commercial airplay. ASCAP and BMI and CSAC are your friends. It's clearly, performance income for your song being performed is a very lucrative source of money. And then after those, certainly if your song is being used in karaoke, if your music is licensed to other uses, if your lyric is reprinted in a greeting card, they're ancillary. And now certainly ringtones and what's happening with the licensing of pop and current contemporary music in ringtones is very lucrative. Downloads on iTunes is a very lucrative source of income now. Those are sort of the major streams of income. iTunes, when a consumer pays 99 cents for the download of the music, and iTunes keeps a portion of the money, and the record company that licensed the recording, there's a recording and there's a song, the record company keeps another portion, and typically you can imagine that iTunes might keep about 25 or 35 cents of the 99 cents. The record company will get the remaining 60 cents. Of the 60 cents, it's a question unresolved on what portion of that does the record company keep and what portion of that does the artist keep. The songwriter will get their 8.5 cents as a mechanical payment. The bigger issue is what does the performing artist keep with the record company, and they're not in complete agreement yet on how to interpret that money. Harry Fox Agency collects by and large mechanical income for writers and for publishers when they have music dispersed amongst a lot of different record companies, a lot of different labels. Harry Fox is the agent, much like ASCAP and BMI and CSAC collect in the performance income, because a writer couldn't possibly license all of the radio stations and all the TV stations in this country, and certainly not overseas. Harry Fox does that function of licensing and collecting mechanical incomes for record sales for writers that have diverse and multiple releases. If an artist has just a single release, sometimes you can make a direct mechanical license with a record company, and the record company will pay you. But at the time that you start to have a lot of different records out, and it's sort of hard to handle, it's sometimes much more efficient for a prolific writer or prolific artist to have Harry Fox collect on their behalf. It's owned by the publishers, but they extract a fee, and technically I don't know that they're called a not-for-profit. I'm not certain at this point. Their fee is reasonable, 4%, 5% of what their collections are, and they distribute the bulk. So it is a service that's for writers and publishers, but they certainly have operating costs, and it's a big expense to collect on a worldwide basis. Well, music has changed in all formats. The delivery of music is different. You know, before it used to be, publishers just literally published sheet music, and you reduced your song to a mechanical form, and so that would be your two streams of income: print and sheet music, and mechanicals from sales. Now, with certainly advent of digital, and certainly imprint labels and smaller record companies and reissue record companies and remix record companies, it gets very, very complicated to track it. So that's why people generally enlist the services of Harry Fox. If you have those multiple kinds of reissues, re-releases, remixes, then you're in a digital environment, and Harry Fox, quite frankly, is, entering this new frontier along with the rest of us. And these licenses are brand new, and the users don't really know yet what the format is on how to pay. The collecting agencies don't really know how to format. The law has not really kept up in pace with what these new forms are using. It's unclear, without getting too technical, but it's interesting that when music is used in an iTunes format, It's unclear whether that use in iTunes is looked at as the sale of a record. If it's looked at as a sale of a record, the artist would get their artist royalty rate, typically 12 or 14% of an artist royalty rate. That's if iTunes is looked as if you're selling a record. If iTunes usage is looked as that it's a third-party license, and we're just licensing our song to iTunes and not really selling a physical record, it looks as a license, and the royalty rate for a third-party license is typically 50-50. So the artist would get 50% of that 66 cents, or would they get 14% of the unresolved? And it's sort of problematic, as you can well imagine. The artists think that it's a third-party license and they want 50% of that iTunes money. The label perceives it as selling just another record, and they only want to pay the artist 12%. And there's a bit of a divide, and not resolved. It's really the state of affairs of what's going on. When Napster introduced peer-to-peer file sharing of music, and I imagine, is that 10 years ago now? It's been a while at this point. The Napster issue and how to monetize and license digital distribution of music was upheaval, major upheaval for us, and that really remains that. Just in the notion of iTunes, when we just talked about a moment ago, whether digital information comes to you as a download or a stream. If it's a download and you can hold the music, it's going to be perceived as a mechanical. If it's a stream, it's going to be perceived as a public performance. So there's a question on whether Harry Fox goes in and licenses internet sites for distributing mechanical versions of music, or does ASCAP and BMI go into a digital site and ask for an ASCAP or BMI or CSAC license because it's a stream and it's a public performance? Unresolved. I look back historically when radio was introduced in the 20s, and at the onset of the introduction of radio, it was perceived as broadcasting music for free, and it was perceived as a very adventuresome technology that was ripping off songwriters and publishers. And songwriters and publishers early on were not happy with this new technology called radio and tried to restrict it or get a handle on it. And it took years before the publishing community, on behalf of the writers, could figure out a way to license radio stations. Well, as we now know now, if you fast forward from the 20s to now, the licensing of radios is the single largest source of income that writers and publishers enjoy, that public performance. The more you get played, the more you get paid. Well, I sort of have the same kind of view in digital distribution and peer-to-peer file sharing, that it looks like a pretty radical technology. It looks like it's taking advantage of copyright owners. And yet, in the same way that we're able to license radio to become very lucrative, I think we're moving towards, and moving, in my view, a little too slowly, licensing digital distribution, because it ought to be a very, very lucrative stream of income for writers and publishers. We haven't gotten it right yet. I have different views of downloading music from the mainstream copyright community. Yes, it's stealing music and downloading it if you don't pay for it. But I came from ASCAP for 16 years where I knew that we licensed users of music. We had mechanisms, whether we were licensing radio stations or licensing television stations. We knew how to monetize. We knew how to license. We knew the mechanics of a license. So when I look at the digital environment, I think we have the same obligation to figure out the mechanics of a license to digital distribution. Yes, it's wrong to download music and not pay for it. Yes, it's stealing. But the copyright community, in my opinion, has been very slow and set up obstacles to what I think could have been a much more fluid way to understand the technology and license the technology. And I think the burden is on both the tech community and the publishing community to come together. Rights community in general, the record companies, certainly they own the masters, publishers on behalf of their writers, and the tech community to come out to a way that there's historical ways that we can license this and get to where it's lucrative and rewarding for both interests. We're not there yet. Well, the concept of work for hire is interesting. There's a legitimate version of work for hire, and then there's sometimes an illegitimate version of work for hire. If a composer seeks to be hired for a project and wants to get paid a fee up front for rendering service and then deliver the work to the employer, as it were, very legitimate. We enter a work for hire agreement. You've agreed to write the music. I've agreed to buy the music. The complication of work for hire comes back to who is the writer of the work of record and who is the publisher of the work of record. In a typical work for hire, the writer would retain his writer interest. Writers would always be known as the writer, be credited as the writer, and would retain all of those streams of income as the writer. The employer would go down and become the publisher. Now that's very legitimate. It happens all the time. It's very acceptable. That's the proper way for work for hires. What does happen, and is a little more unsavory, is this notion of sometimes there are work for hire where an employer would engage a writer, pay him a fee, which is good for a writer, and then the writer would be asked to take his writer credit off and lose his writer credit and lose his writer streams of income. The employer certainly has the right to claim the publishing interest of the song, but it leaves a question mark as to who owns the writer's share and who should it go to. And it's not totally savory that an employer who engages a writer legitimately owns the publisher's share, but then goes ahead and puts his name on as the writer's share. That's not comfortable in the community. So, as I say, work for hire can be a very legitimate tool if the writer retains his writer's share. It gets questionable if the writer's asked to remove his name. The notion of non-writers putting their name to a writer's share happens often. In the film and TV and production communities, it happens very often, where there's ghost writers, just production writers, and there's oftentimes that some of the biggest household names that we know, production entities that we know, engage writers on a work for hire basis. And writers need to make a living. So if you're an up-and-coming starving writer and you are offered a writing contract, whether it's to a TV series or a DVD production, and you're a writer and an employer says, hi, I'm going to pay you $500 a week to write the music, and I'm paying you $500 and you agree to deliver the music and walk away from it, well, a writer certainly has the right to walk away. And depending on their circumstances, they ought. Now, I'm not comfortable with the writer walking away from their writer share. The writer share they should stay embedded to. They can certainly walk away from their publisher share. That's the value of publishing and being paid a fee. At this point, there are production companies that simply erase the original writer's name on and put on a different writer's name. For young folks that want to be on the publishing side, not a songwriter, but someone who wants to be in a publisher, I think it's I think it's the vibrant place to be in the music community. Given the turmoil of record labels, publishing is not only much more secure, but it has multiple revenue streams. So an entrepreneur, a young, aggressive, sharp person that wanted to get involved with publishing, knowing that we have digital opportunities and ringtone opportunities, in addition to just traditional recording artists, covers, film and TV placements. There's such really a broad panacea of options. It's really exciting. It's a great time to be a publisher. Perhaps not a better time than to be a publisher, especially seen through the lens that record sales are diminishing. They're not selling as many traditional record copies, and much more is happening through a digital distribution. Now, whether that digital distribution is perceived as downloading a record or streaming a song, either way, publishers will either participate as the mechanical payment or they'll participate as the performance income. So publishers are in a really interesting situation. So it's vibrant for us. We're actively engaged, and publishing is a good thing to be in now. We're fortunate because we're in Los Angeles, and Los Angeles has some fabulous music schools. USC, for one, UCLA, they have great music programs, and we actually have some smaller colleges that are here. Cal State Northridge has a really good music program. So we actually go to the music schools first and have arrangements with them where the students come and get credits. And if you peek out the window, you'll see that we have 3 interns out there now that are actively engaged from filtering for us and listening. They're burning CDs. They're um, trying to develop new writers for us and telling us what they like, what's going on. We have some interns that are strictly involved in royalties and administration. They're in software programs. They're in QuickBook programs for royalty and FileMaker Pro. So if someone has really software and accounting interests or creative interests or casting interests, it's a pretty wide palette now. And we're thrilled. Our interns have been really critical for us. Characteristics for intern are really geared toward the specific division that we want. My film and TV department is actively involved in pitching music to current film and TV projects. So we have an intern now that was really interviewed for that specific reason. We were looking for someone that knew television, that knew film, that had a passion as either a filmmaker or a production person. And then they actually, in our language, get involved with casting. You really want to, if you see a television show, whether it's West Wing or CSI or My Name is Earl, and you get a sense of what they're looking for, and if you can get into the head of the show, and every show has what's called a music supervisor. The music supervisor is the right-hand person to the director. The director has the visual image, and they work with a music supervisor that has the musical image, what the soundtrack will be. And we have relationships with the music supervisors of television shows and production companies and film companies, because it's the music supervisor who is really the conduit between getting actually in the production. So again, back to our intern, some interns really like that aspect of trying to cast music. What in our catalog fits best for their needs? Then we have other interns, I say, that are more technical oriented. They really like burning CDs. They really like downloading. They really like the aspect of how we have to do with finding music on the internet. And there's several sites that young bands and young songwriters post their music. So we have interns that just listen 8 hours a day trying to find new music for us, rather than people mailing us CDs, which we often get. And then now we have need for royalty collection software, so we can interview. So it's pretty open-ended on what an intern can do and what jobs we actually have to satisfy for our writers. There are several books. Certainly, Music, Money, and Success is written by the Brabeck brothers. is a great book. Don Passman. It's interesting. I just have to have them here. This is Music, Money, and Success by Brabecks, and it's a great book. Don Passman has written another book, Everything You'd Want to Know About the Music Business. There are several other. Dick Weissman is, this one's by Michael Axon. I just happen to have these here. It looks sort of set up, but Michael Axon's written a great book, Legal Companion. These are ones that I actually reference often. Get It in Writing as a book. This is put out by the Beverly Hills Bar Association, the Musician's Business and Legal Guide. And they're all really wonderful resources, some more technical than others, some dry and hard, some have actually contracts in them, so there's a lot of opportunities, and there's more resources than this out there as well. Music education, traditional music education in music schools has really gone through a revolution in the last 10 years, I'd say. Prior to 10 or 12 or 14 years ago, if you said the word music school, if a student wanted to be in music and a parent had to respond to music, you'd hear about music schools, and by and large it meant some orchestral or choral, I'm going to study orchestra and become a violinist. And certainly that's not all it was, but music schools traditionally were limited by and large to a creative, to a performance aspect. And about 10 or 12 years ago, music schools started to realize two things: that there was a music business, and there was a broad and open-ended opportunity for music business to train their students. Well, not only was that helpful for students coming up, that students could be trained. When I was coming up years and years ago, there was no music business program, and I went to law school, and there certainly was no music business courses even offered in my law school. Now even some of the community, I mean the law schools in Los Angeles and New York actually have some music law programs, but it certainly wasn't the case, and I don't know if it is through the rest of the country. But the traditional colleges now, their music programs split, and they certainly have still a music program for choral and classical and performance, but they now have, most of them have business programs, vibrant business programs, and they've found, and I taught at several of them, that enrollment increases if you offer a music business program, because parents can endorse that and sort of embrace it a little bit more than they can, hi, my child is going to become a concert pianist. What is the likelihood of them supporting themselves? As opposed to, my child is going to get a music business education and can go into pre-law, can go into publishing, can go into recording, touring, management, merchandise. And at this point, it's exciting. There is a group of music industry educators called the Music Industry Educators Association that ties together probably the 40 or 50 colleges in this country that have music business programs. And it's a valid degree now. You can get a certificate in music business education. And I think parents embrace it by their vote, because those are the programs that are now growing and are successful. For a young person wanting to be in the performance end of music, I'm a player, I'm a performer, I'm a songwriter, they need to educate themselves. It's a very complicated world, and quite honestly, it's not smooth sailing just by the nature of the people that are in the business. There's some very aggressive people and some very smart, talented business people. There's some unscrupulous people that are attracted to the business that can take advantage of artists, and unfortunately, the most gifted artists sometimes aren't the most alert to their business welfare, and they can be taken advantage of. So clearly, to anyone who wants to pursue, I think, a musical or a creative career, education, resources, reference books, information. There's a lot of associations, there's a lot of seminars, there's a lot of conferences to attend to. There's certainly knowledge available now to people, and there's groups, certainly more than there was 10 or 12 years ago, and there are some very prestigious national conferences, localized national conferences that are now spread out. South by Southwest is in Austin, Texas. There's a lot of now music regional opportunities to get educated. Most major cities have a music association that brings in speakers and conferences. There are now great books. There's great books online. So before they, some of these books just couldn't get distribution. You couldn't really be in Des Moines, Iowa, and expect to find, the 40 books that are published. But now online you can find them. There's really a lot of great resources online as well. If you go even to the ASCAP and BMI sites, just for starting points, they actually have a resource section, and it's a fabulous amount of articles, references. So there's any number of ways to to sort of direct people to get knowledge. And of course, for any creator, the most important thing is, if they're going to get representative, a manager, an agent, anybody's going to come on board, rule number one is certainly contact an attorney and make certain that you get an entertainment attorney, not the divorce attorney, not the real estate attorney. Get an entertainment attorney. If anytime there's a contract offered, make certain that an entertainment attorney reviews it for you. Our business is clearly an international business. We have to think globally. The foreign markets are substantial for us, and especially as traditional record sales decline, we have to find other ways to grow revenues and grow income. It's no longer about trying to get a song to Bonnie Raitt or Celine Dion. There's much more opportunity. We've had several of our songs now recorded in foreign languages because of our associations with foreign territories. Our foreign collections are significant, and depending publisher by publisher, some publishers' music may not play so well in foreign territories, and we're lucky because we have some Rod Stewart songs and some Cher songs, Bruce Hornsby songs, and they still enjoy, 20 years later, 15 years later, still great success in foreign territories. So it's very important for us to be able to collect shekels and rubles and yen and pesos and interpret that, and that's called publishing administration, collecting the foreign royalties. The foreign territories, country by country, all have their collection agencies, their version of an ASCAP or a BMI, their mechanism for collecting money, and likewise there are agents that deal with them and collect them. Those are called sub-publishers. Publishers, just like we are in the United States, and I can effectively deal with the local collecting and licensing agencies and users, production companies here. They have the same series in foreign territories of sub-publishers. We have French one, we have an Italian one, and people have options. Writers have options of either entering territory by territory I really like the French guy. I really like that Italian guy. And you can stitch together 10, 12, 15, 18 different sub-publishers. Or you can have what's called a worldwide deal. And you go to one of the big international publishers, and there's 4 or 5 or 6, and there's a couple new ones that are emerging now that go around, and one company has people grounded in each territory, and they collect for you. So some people are much more comfortable having one company collect in 50 different territories. It's just easier for either that publisher or for that writer to have one entity collect. Others of us are a little bit more neurotic and obsessive, and I really want this French guy. And I spent 3 years, this company's only 4 years old, and I spent the first 3 years going to Europe and interviewing all of the worldwide sub-publishers, because I just really wanted to have a territory by territory guy. And there's usually 3 or 4 companies in each territory, certainly the big territories. And I interviewed them, I met with them, you talk to them, you sort of arm wrestle on what they're going to charge me on behalf of collections, how effective they can be, what can they do for me in terms of exploiting the catalog. So part of it's just the dollars and cents. Are you going to be able to, collect my rubles for me? The other element is how creative can you be? Can you pitch my music in Kuala Lumpur? Can you get me an ad for Coca-Cola in Bangladesh? So you interview these people, and I'm much more comfortable having my 9 or 10 individual people, on the ground in different territories. And then I actually have a rest of the world deal with one company that collects for the other 25 very small territories. But I wanted my big 12 with people that I handpicked. Foreign sub-publishers take somewhere between 10 and 15%. I believe there's one sub-publisher that might take 20% of what they can collect, but typically you're between 10 and 15%. It's an arm wrestle, it's a leverage. I certainly don't want them to take more than 10%. They certainly want to try and take 15%, but we go back and forth on what kind of tonnage, what kind of music, what kind of royalties I'm presenting to them, and you can negotiate whether it's a viable catalog and a lot of work for them and a lot of revenues. And then they do that work, and we've actually been very successful with some of our foreign sub-publishers that if they take a fine-tooth comb to royalties, you can find a lot of stuff lying on the floor. A lot of stuff falls through the gaps, either because the title was put into a different language and they didn't get the interpretation correct and you lost the royalties, or you just didn't register it properly. If you're looking for a title of a song, and if you get one letter wrong, it's not going to connect. You won't get your money. So we had a writer that found us thousands of dollars from a release several years ago just because it was not registered properly in their territory. And that's fabulous. And I'm not so sure that if you had casual sub-publishers that you'd find the money laying on the floor. For every 15 or 16-year-old kid that's writing a lot of music, or a 30-year-old that's been writing music for a long time or brand new, they have a notebook full of music. To me, they have spheres of living, breathing songs, whether it's recorded on their tape machine or now on Pro Tools, and they've got these digital recordings. The real challenge for them is what to do. How do they get out of their bedroom and into the marketplace? And they can, use any of the resources that we've talked about. They can attend conferences, they can attend seminars. If you can go to references and resources on the net or through books, and each one of these books tells how to get your music played, how to get your music exposed, lists of publishers that listen to unsolicited tapes or might be able to review or critique. Certainly finding a publisher is one of the strongest ways that a writer in the hinterlands that wants their music out can send us music. My goodness, we get 5, 10 CDs a day. I haven't opened today's mail of CDs. I went to a conference this weekend and literally came back with a bag full of music. And people were aggressive to give me the CDs, and I'm somewhat open to listen to it. Some publishers aren't, but we're still young enough that we want to find the next great writer. We want to see if there is a next great writer, and hopeful that there would be. So, writers, it's just a matter of being ingenious and putting a little legwork in. It sometimes seems daunting. The most curious thing for a writer at home, living in Boise, they just may be a gifted writer. You know, why should a gifted writer also be a gifted promoter or marketer or salesman? It really doesn't make sense, and it's not fair to think that, hi, boy, do I write the great tunes, but boy, am I great on the phone, and that doesn't match. So it's a very hard leap to find who can help you, and yet LA and Nashville and New York are sometimes magnets. There are, on the other hand, some writers that are really aggressive salesmen, probably better salesmen than they are writers. And we actually have a lot of those that pound on the doors all the time. They're roasting potatoes in our lobby, and they won't go away. They're like the Marx Brothers. They'll just sit there until someone takes heed. So it's a balance, and I always like to say when we're evaluating music, you can be really, really creative and a gifted songwriter, and this level can be really high creative. But if you're not a marketer or salesman, how far are you going to get? And then sometimes you find these really great salesmen, and they're not very good writers, and they're pitching aggressively stuff that isn't that good. And then you know, so what is the, you know, and I'm not so sure that this is the right answer either. I'm not so sure you'd be a mediocre in this. You know, the answer is be a gifted, very talented, committed writer, and find someone who's a very talented, gifted publisher or promoter or marketer, and that's sometimes the best marriage. Our contracts have terms with our writers, and the term is just one of several moving parts in the agreement. And when we choose to represent a writer and a writer chooses us to be represented, the key elements of that agreement is how many songs are they giving us, which is called the Schedule A. Are they giving us one song or multiple songs? What's the duration of the ownership of that? How many years are we going to own it in perpetuity for the life of copyright? Another important element is if there's going to be a reversion of that copyright. Oftentimes, a writer will ask a publisher to enter into a situation, and they'll grant the publisher a specified term of years, 6 years, 8 years, 10 years, at which point the copyright returns back, reverts to the songwriter. Some publishers aren't so happy about reversions. Writers seek reversions, but that's an interesting element. Certainly, generally the territory is for the world. You usually represent songwriters for the world. And what the ownership is, whether you're entering into a co-publishing, is the publisher getting 50% or 100% or an admin? So those are the key elements in a songwriter-publisher agreement. Publishers seek to own the song outright in perpetuity. Publishers really want to have 100% of the publishing for the life of copyright. And the life of copyright now is life of the composer plus 70 years. It's not a comfortable situation for a publisher to say, hi, I want to enter into a short-term lease of the song and revert it back to you, especially if publishers do the heavy lifting. Hi, we're going to pitch it, we're going to get Bonnie Raitt to record your song, we're going to get Celine Dion to record your song, we're going to place it in film and TV, and it's going to have income streams, and yet then the ownership of the song reverts. That's not a comfortable situation for publishers. Writers, on the other hand, seek the reversion, and that's part of this, the moving parts in this negotiation on, you know, what's going to feel right, what's going to incentivize both parties.